Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical way of looking at time, and it's drawn directly from the language of the Quran itself. So, for a few minutes, let's just set aside that familiar, straight line we all picture for our lives and see what happens when we look at the original words. This is a journey from the line to depth. So let me start with a question for you. When you think about your life and everything that comes after, what's the picture that pops into your head? For most of us, it's something like a straight line, right? A journey with a very clear beginning and a very clear end. Yeah, we see a line, a journey with a start, a middle, and an end that leads to something else. This is the map we're all familiar with. You're born, you live your life, you die, and then you move on to the afterlife. And look, that totally makes sense. It's a horizontal, one-way trip from point A to point B. It's just how we're wired to think about our existence, chronologically. But here's the big question. What if that's not the only map out there? What if the Quran's own language is pointing to a completely different model, one that's less about a horizontal timeline and more about a vertical reality? A reality that's not about when you are, but about the depth of how you are, right here, right now. To really get this, we've got to go back to the source code, the original Arabic words themselves, because this is where the whole reinterpretation really begins. Okay, so let's take the word ad-dunya. We usually translate it as this world or this life, but its root, DNW, actually means something closer to near or immediate. So dunya isn't really a place on a timeline, it's more of a state of perception. It's our surface level, what we see right in front of us reality. Now let's look at its counterpart, al-akhirah, which we usually call the afterlife. Its root, al-akhir, means subsequent or what comes after. This suggests it's not some far-off future destination. No, it's the deeper reality, the consequences that are constantly unfolding from our actions in the immediate. It's the depth that's always right there, just beneath the surface. So, here's the big shift in a nutshell. We're moving from a horizontal view of now versus later to a totally vertical one, surface versus depth. They aren't two different times we're talking about. They are two layers of the exact same reality, and we're experiencing them both simultaneously. So, if reality has this kind of vertical structure, how does the Quran actually present its own guidance? I mean, is it just a history book tied to the 7th century, or is it something else? Something more like a living map? Well, the Quran uses this very specific verb to talk about its own revelation, anzalnahu. It's a past tense, completed action, meaning we sent it down. And this implies that the guidance is a single, unified whole, a finished map that is always available, not just a bunch of historical fragments pieced together over time. And the source material for this explainer gives us this powerful analogy. The principles in the Quran are kind of like gravity or math. Pythagoras discovered his theorem at a specific point in history, but the principle itself, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was always true. The guidance works the same way. It's made of timeless principles that were just articulated in a specific moment. This whole idea really comes into focus in a short but incredibly profound chapter, Surah al-Asr. Now, it's often translated as the time, but its root meaning points to something way more dynamic. The root of al-Asr isn't about the passive ticking of a clock. It actually means to press, to squeeze, to extract. Think about squeezing juice from a fruit. So it frames time not as some gentle river we're all floating on, but as a constant pressure, a squeeze, that reveals what we're really made of. And the chapter opens with this absolutely stunning declaration. By this squeeze, indeed, the human is in a state of loss. It's saying that the default human condition, when you put it under the constant pressure of existence, is to come up empty, to be in a state of deficit. But it doesn't just leave us there. It gives us a 4-part formula for building real substance, something to withstand this pressure. First, you have to be anchored in reality, which is iman. Second, you have to take restorative actions that heal and make things whole. And third and fourth, we have to mutually counsel each other towards what's real and support each other with steadfastness, or sabr. It's a collective path out of that state of loss. All right, let's pull all of these threads together. What does it actually look like to live in this vertical time? Well, it means shifting our focus away from some future destination and onto the depth that's available to us in the present moment. At its heart, what we're looking at here are two fundamentally different models for understanding our entire existence. And this table really sums it up. You have the traditional view, which sees time as linear, past, present, future. But the Quranic view sees it as a progressive unfolding, from the surface to the depth. Revelation isn't just a historical event, but a timeless, complete map. And maybe most important of all, our focus shifts from waiting for a future afterlife to accessing that deeper reality right now. And it even changes how we see a day, not as a fixed 24 hours, but as a relative unit of experience.
And what's cool is that this vertical model starts to clarify other big Quranic concepts. For example, death can suddenly refer to a state of being spiritually asleep or heedless, not just a biological end. The hour could be understood as a sudden moment of awakening, a realization, not just some date on a future calendar. And it totally explains how a day can be relative. Its length depends entirely on the frame of reference, which resolves what might seem like huge contradictions.
So we're left with this final thought. Maybe time isn't a line that you are on, just helplessly being carried from the past to the future. Maybe, instead, it's a depth that you are in, right now, this very second. And if that's true, then the only real question left is, how deep are you willing to live?